Quick fun fact about our speakers, they'll tell you a lot more about what they do in their day job, but something you might not know about either of them. Nicole, this is a bit of American sports trivia for the Europeans in the audience, but Nicole used to work for an American baseball team called the St. Louis Cardinals, and Carmen has a son who covers an American football team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, sports fans, if anybody knows either of those teams, but I got a fist bump. Cool. All right, well, without further ado, I'll kick things off with Carmen. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Carmen DeArdo. Nicole will be up next. We saved the best for last. I'm going to tell kind of my tale through my experience both at Bell Labs and then as a DevOps lead at Nationwide Insurance, the American version of Nationwide. I know there's a European version of Nationwide. But now I'm also at Tasktop with Nicole, working on value stream management and trying to work with teams to improve their flow and accelerate their delivery capability. Okay, here we go. So first problem is I can't run the clicker. But anyway, 5 problems. So, you know, this talks about going from project to product, right? And so when you take a step back, I think one of the things we see is there's typically a disconnect between the business and IT, right? I mean, IT is doing a lot of work. They're getting a lot of activities done, but sometimes the business doesn't understand how does this align with the value I'm trying to get with the products I'm trying to deliver. And I know a lot of times IT then feels like a black box. It's also viewed as kind of a, you know, IT solving their own problems, right? They're doing this cloud thing, they have this technology stuff going. I've seen them do Agile, I've seen them do DevOps. I'm still not seeing business results out of this. And so they just kind of see that they're pouring a lot of money into it, but what are we getting out of this? And then the whole funding around projects is kind of fundamentally broken, and we'll get into that a little bit. So there's 7 areas that we're going to look through and hit on about this difference between project and product orientation. And the first one's around budgeting. So typically, you know, you start a project, you have a scope, you have a budget, and it's kind of a temporal thing, right? A project's going to start, it's going to end. And so, you know, you're trying to define your scope, and you have this funding that might be like on a part of a yearly funding cycle, right? I know, you know, at some companies you have to start 18 months ahead to get funding for an initiative that you're going to be doing, you know, the next year or the year and a half from that. But when you think about it from a business perspective, right, they have a product they're trying to sell, right? You know, maybe it's an insurance policy, right? Maybe it's a car, maybe whatever it is that product is. Things are going to happen continuously where you may decide the market needs have changed. I need to infuse new money into this cycle, right? And it's hard to do that when you're looking at this concept of a project versus continuously improving a product that's delivering value to your customers. You know, the time frames I kind of hit on, right? Projects have these associated start and stop dates. I remember when I first started to work at Nationwide, I was coming in near the end of the year in November, and it was almost like a factory shutting down production for the year because a lot of these projects and their funding was running out, and so there was like this 2 or 3 months, and then in January things picked up again, and it was like, well, did our customers go away for 3 months and they're not expecting value or improvement? And so this whole aspect of fixed funding for a fixed initiative is really not the way, you know, we can operate when we're trying to sell products and continuously improve them and address the needs of the market. So in the product life cycle, right, you can continue to go around that loop from the customer, right? Everything always starts and ends with the customer of getting their ideas and creating new value for that customer, releasing it to them. Again, your idea of success sometimes was different, right? if IT looks like a black box, and it looks like I'm pouring money into this from a business perspective, and I'm not necessarily seeing the same kind of results that I expect to, right, in terms of, improved speed to market or improved operational capability, then it's just a cost center, right? In fact, I can remember being in an interesting discussion where, the view was, well, we have to reduce our IT costs. And I was thinking, well, I understand if you have an area of IT costs that are not aligned, like you're spending more on infrastructure than maybe you should or whatever. But if all things were equal and I was going to invest in two companies today, and one was investing more in IT and one was investing less, I think most of us would want to invest in the company that was investing more in IT, right? Because that's going to be the business differentiator in the future. So we still seem to be stuck in this mindset of IT as a cost center, and that drives a lot of decisions based on finances, right? When really we need to think more about speed to market. The whole aspect of teams is different. So again, we had an experience where when I went from Bell Labs to Nationwide, I'll talk a little more about this, but at Nationwide, we were using Clarity, and we had all these complex allocations that we were going to set up for the next year. Everybody's hours were going to be allocated. And so let's say you needed 3 different systems changed, right? The allocation might say, well, I need 2 people from that team, 1 person from that team, a half from them, and a quarter from them. And I would wonder, where's this quarter person, right? I mean, I understand there's hours associated, and then maybe that makes sense from a project planning perspective, but the idea of time slicing people to the point where maybe they're working on 6 or 12 things at the same time, which was not uncommon in my experience, that's just too much whip. That's too much work in progress, and the people suffer, the systems suffer, and you're constantly forming and storming and reforming around these teams. Instead, a product model says, I'm going to have a team or a set of teams supporting this product, and they're going to be a high-performing team, a cross-skilled T-shaped team, and then I'm going to bring the work to that team, right? And so you have that team together who's constantly working and improving and building and performing instead of this constant tearing up and tearing down teams that's very expensive. And then your whole prioritization. Again, even when at Nationwide we started to do Agile back in 2006, by 2016, we were very fast in the middle part of our value stream, right? If you gave an Agile team a card through a set of iterations, they were very fast. But this was still all put within a context of a project waterfall model, right? We still had projects that were going on, and there were still phases of protracted work activities. We estimated at one point that half of our time was spent before we even got anything in the backlog of an Agile team. And that was all kind of invisible, right? Because there's a lot of focus on the right-hand side of the value stream. I call it from code to cloud, which is necessary to stay competitive. But there's this whole part on the left-hand side from customer idea through actually starting the work from a development perspective that's not tracked, it's not visible, and it tends to follow this waterfall kind of approach. Where in a product model, you can really be agile throughout your complete value stream. Jonathan Smart of Barclays gave a good talk a few months ago in London where he talked about, how can you say you're agile when you still have 30, 60, 90-day capacity demand processes at the front end of your process to get work done. That's not agile, right? You can only be as agile as kind of your least agile part. So the product model kind of takes that continuous workflow vision into account. And then, as I just said about visibility, right? It's hard to track your work in this project model, right? The project managers may have their work in a project management tool, right? The Scrum Masters who are doing part of the work, if you go up to an Agile team and you see their Kanban board, it's great. But where did this work come from? And where's it going after these set of iterations? Because it's probably not going immediately to production. You can't see that, and furthermore, it's hard to necessarily see the business value that's flowing throughout this value stream. So by aligning more your IT and your business needs, so that you can actually identify what this business work is and how it's flowing, not just from code to cloud, but all the way from idea, through the entire value stream of activities through deployment, you now can show business exactly what's going on, what they're spending their money on, gives them a better opportunity to prioritize work, not just at the beginning of a project, but throughout the lifespan of this product, which is going to be several, hopefully, if it's a successful problem, many years, a successful product. And then risk. I think a lot of times what I saw in a project model was there was a focus on features, right? I mean, you're probably doing this project, unless it's an infrastructure project or something, for features, something that's going to sell to the customer. But there's really 4 types of work, when you think about it. There's business value work, there's defects, there's risk, and there's debt, which you're actually paying to allow things in the future to go faster. It was very hard at times to convince a project manager to spend their fixed project dollars to address a risk issue like we have a struts vulnerability, or I really, when I'm in this code base, could make the next set of things go faster. Well, why do I want to pay for that? All right, I'm under the gun. I'm already seen as a cost center. I got to save money. I got to stick to my budget. And why do I care about the struts library thing? That's not in my backlog of features that I'm trying to deal with. So there was this tug and tension between the goals of the project, who's trying to base everything on this fixed plan, like we were building a dam or building a bridge, kind of the model that we used maybe in the last century, versus where we are today, where things are constantly changing in the marketplace. We need to take advantage of that and feed that in and be able to prioritize our risk, as we've seen with things like, we've all been exposed, I'm sure, unfortunately, last year to some risk PII issue, because it probably wasn't given the priority of the other work that needed to be done. So these are tables that are in the deck, but they kind of summarize what I said. So again, if I briefly go back and talk about my experience, right, when I worked at Bell Labs, which is in the 90s, a long time ago, there was no concept of DevOps, right? But we actually had already a setup where we had product-oriented teams around certain things like, the 4E switch, the 5E switch, some of our network capabilities. And even though we had a yearly budget process, we still, every quarter, were looking at the money and deciding where to invest and where to change it. So I know a lot of companies are tied into these yearly budgets, and that may be something that can't be changed. That doesn't mean you still can't have something where you quarterly or periodically look and say, does it make sense to invest in this product versus this product, and adjust the funding and the resources accordingly. Again, teams were more focused on not a project, but what was going out in their next release of that product. That's a different mentality, right? Because if you think you're supporting a product, then you care about, the whole concept of that product, how well, not just what you're doing today, but what you're going to be doing tomorrow, how you can make that better, how you address all the different work that you're doing. And we already were doing things because of our network API around dark launching and things like that. So we already had more independence of that team, right? When I first came to Nationwide, again, all the work except for maybe some run work was done in projects. So as I said, teams were constantly being formed. Developers love to spend their time in project meetings, right? Because there's lots of meetings going on, because I have to know status, I have to report on costs, I have to report on all these things. The system integrity tended to be hard to maintain because projects were hitting multiple systems, and this quarter of a person was working on it from one system and was working on other projects, and other people from that system were all split across these various work that they were doing for these projects. So it was hard to actually maintain the integrity of the applications that were being changed by these projects. And it was also hard to track these dependencies because, you know, in a world where even though we're trying to get to smaller batch sizes and microservices, if you're working in a large company, that's not where you probably are today. So you have lots of dependencies to manage, which just means more meetings of project managers and more project coordination. So those long batch sizes went into long release cycles, right? And you were sort of in this cycle of dependency where you couldn't actually deliver more quickly. You know, and it wasn't just all because of the project model, but that fed into the mentality of I'm doing something once versus I'm doing something and I'm going to continuously improve upon it. So I think, you know, one of the ways to approach this then is looking at it from a value stream perspective, right? And one of the key roles you need there is one of the product owner who has responsibility for the things on the left-hand side of this diagram, right? And this is even for your internal products, like your IT products, like your pipeline. So my previous job was I was the pipeline owner for all the applications, all the work that was going to be done across, you know, the thousands of applications that we had nationwide. And what was critical is that you could control or influence, you know, three things: prioritization of the work, you know, the funding, and it's not up here, but the architecture of how that all fits together, right? And then you want your team as much as possible to be cross-skilled. Now, Nicole and I joke about this idea of a fairy tale where you can have one two-pizza team support a product, right? That would be great, right? It would be great if we could just say, I have this great product, I have this insurance product or financial product, and I can just have a two-pizza team, and they're fully empowered to make any changes that they need to deliver that. But the reality is, that's not probably going to happen, right? There's going to be shared teams that have to do some work. There are other areas that may have to be involved, other systems that this entire team can't support. But as much as possible, if you can empower that team and allow them to have as much control as possible over the flow of work, then the faster they can progress, right? Because if you walked up to a team and you asked them, why can't you go faster, they typically said they're waiting for something. They might be waiting for work, which I saw a lot because work wasn't flowing fast enough from the front end, or they're waiting for infrastructure and environment, or they're waiting for another team to do something. So one of the powerful ways to mitigate that is this concept of inner sourcing, right? And now with the advent of pull requests, right, if I have a team and they have the domain expertise to make changes, then they can make those changes, issue a pull request, and then the owner of the system, the owner of that code base, still has the ability to approve it before it goes into production. So that's a different way of doing things to mitigate some of the wait states that you see in your value stream. You know, other wait states I typically saw were things like performance testing or security testing, which required a request response to another team to do. And a way to mitigate that is to make it self-service as possible, right? So can you allow your teams themselves to do their performance testing? Can you embed security into your pipeline as part of CI, right? How many things can you do to mitigate the wait states that you currently have that would allow you to deliver more quickly? And that gets into the whole empower aspect of if a team feels more empowered, that they're actually supporting a product, they understand the business need behind it, they're working more closely with the customer, they have a pride in that product, and they're going to continually be working on it, it's not just a one and done deal, then you're going to have a more engaged team. And we know from Gallup and other reports, things we've heard, you know, at this conference, the more engaged your team is, the more capable, you know, the higher performance they're going to be. And so finally, before Nicole comes up here, is this whole concept really of that we experimented with was having the business more closely aligned with our IT teams, right? So instead of just having a Kanban board that had the backlog starting with features and stories, we had a Kanban board that had all the work from idea to the backlog for this product. And at one point, we were working with a team, and they were saying they had 8 weeks of time elapsed to get these concepts of ideas worked into the backlog of the team. When they broke it down, it really came out to something like 8 hours. But to try to schedule 8 hours of meetings with all the people involved, and making decisions, and then you forgot where you were after the last 1 hour meeting could take 2 months. Just by having the people in the business now work more closely with the team, they were able to get something that took 8 weeks down to a matter of a few days to flow that work into the team more continuously. So, that whole concept of create flow, empower the team with that product orientation, can make I believe, some significant results in engaging the business, changing their perspective of IT, making work visible to them, and ultimately delivering business value more quickly for the customer, which is why, we're obviously all happy to be doing our work. So with that, I'll hand it over to Nicole.
Cool, thank you. Except I think you have one more slide.
Well, you get covered.
Oh wait, I'm doing it backwards. I'll just do this one real quick. Yeah. So what Carmen would have said, pretend I'm Carmen, what he would have said, I think, is that to get started, there's a few things you can do. One, prime the pump. I think the second one is super important, which is start small, actually, before I do this, how many of y'all work in organizations that have more than 5,000 people in your organization? Okay. And how many of y'all work in organizations that sell software as your primary business? And so the rest of y'all work, I assume, in large enterprises, banking, retail, manufacturing. Okay. So what would be super cool, which we wouldn't be able to do here, but what would be super cool is to get all the people that work for software companies on one side of the room, talking to all the people that work in enterprise banks, because your mentality and everything that goes around how you build software is quite different when you're selling software as your product versus what Carmen's experience and what most of y'all in the room have, which is around your business is banking, your business is retail. And so when that's what your business is, your mindset has to be different. And that's why I think starting small is important, because you will definitely not be able to go in and change an organization of 40,000 people overnight. Empower the value stream team. Experiment, and I'm going to actually talk a bit more about experimenting. Make the adoption work visible, and show and tell with executives. In fact, I went with Carmen when he was still at Nationwide, and we did a 2-day workshop that was really inspiring to see. At the end, we got the CIOs to come in and we showed what we did, and their eyes got super big just seeing what you can accomplish in just 2 days of time running some experiments, which was really cool. Celebrate success, and then you definitely have to have the patience to persevere, because things aren't going to change. Things aren't going to change overnight. How did I do, Carmen?
Better than me.
There you go. All right. So now I'm Nicole. And I'm going to actually, so Carmen has talked a lot about the importance of thinking from a product mindset. I'm actually now going to take it one step further and talk about one more critical piece that you're going to have in your back pocket as part of your toolbox in order to actually move to a product way of thinking. And it's this notion of product modeling. So I always say when I give talks, if there's nothing else you remember, I want you to remember 2 things. I want you to remember product modeling and the notion of abstractions. And that's basically what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this time. So I have this quote: the essence of abstractions is preserving information that is relevant in a given context and forgetting information that is irrelevant in that context. So kind of keep that in mind, and we're going to come back to that as the notion of abstractions. The second thing, before I really dive in, is this. It's mesmerizing just to keep watching that just go by. But your organization's ultimate goal is actually to deliver value. So your goal then is to be able to measure how well you are doing on delivering value. Essentially being able to measure your flow. So now I've given you two things. The notion of abstractions that we're going to come back to, and your goal, which is to be able to measure. So here's the tricky bit. Value streams and product thinking requires you, it actually implores you to think from the business perspective. It's begging you to think from the business perspective and to think about cost, quality, happiness, all from the perspective of what the business needs. But the reality is that there is a different perspective, and that is the technology perspective. And I think most people forget that both perspectives together is what actually gives you the winning formula. But they are two different perspectives. And so why is the technology perspective different? Well, the technology side is the delivery arm, and they have to be able to structure and manage their work in ways that make sense from a delivery perspective. But the business, I can't use the word I really want to use, doesn't really care about that. They just want the stuff they want. They want to sell that product. Or if you're working in a large IT organization, they want their end users of the applications that they're using to get that value quickly. So because of these two different perspectives, fundamentally the business perspective and the IT perspective, just trust me, I've been in this industry for a long time, will never line up. And because of that, that's why you need product modeling, which is an abstraction, a way to abstract and find a happy marriage between these two sides. So I'm going to walk through an example, because otherwise it's a pretty esoteric thing. So here's an example. This is one of the products at Tasktop, Tasktop Integration Hub. So this is the business perspective. This is the thing that my CEO says, how much money are we making on it? Is the quality good? Are we selling it? Are customers happy? That's the business perspective. So this is the value stream being what are the set of activities, what is the actual set of work that we do in order to deliver either a feature, a defect, a risk, or tech debt. So these are the actual activities. So you see things like swagging, breaking down, technical enablement, implementation. So now here comes the dilemma. In order to measure the value that's coming out of this value stream, you actually have to be able to capture and abstract the right information from within the physical constraints that IT has in terms of actually how it's delivering. And so from a delivery perspective, this one value stream that is the thing that is delivering the value for that one product is actually made up, it actually has 7 different artifact types flowing through that value stream. And actually, I've simplified this. I've taken out, there's actually more. But there's features, there's stories, there's code, there's tech debt, there's support tickets. There's 7 different artifact types flowing. It spans 6 different tools. In this case, Confluence, Jira, Target Process, Desk.com, Jenkins, and Salesforce. And actually, I've simplified that too. There's more tools involved. Across 10 different projects. As Carmen mentioned, he and I love to have the debate about the 2 pizza team. It's not really a debate. I won the debate, right?
Yes,
okay.
You won.
It's not possible. The reality is this uses 10 different projects, and by project I'm meaning the containment structure within those tools across 8 different teams. That's the reality. And dare I say it, Tasktop Integration Hub is not that big of a product. So and it's using all these different teams and resources. And so so you see how these 2 different perspectives are. And so how do you overcome this dilemma? How do you overcome this dilemma? Because remember, the whole goal is about measuring. Well, I need to figure out how to measure these 7 different artifact types and 6 tools across 10 projects and 8 teams. And that's really what product modeling is all about. So again, coming back to your goal, which is to measure. So now you have to bring in the notion of artifacts, because in order to measure your product's value stream, what you're actually measuring is your artifacts. Your artifacts are the digital footprint that contain all the information that enable you to be able to measure, right? So if you want to measure wait time, how are you going to measure wait time if you aren't looking at artifacts in order to know, okay, when into this state at this point and when out of this state at this point, and thus you can measure wait time. So essentially what you have to do in product modeling is figure out which artifacts matter. And actually I went to the one of the talks yesterday, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he talked about how Atlassian uses data science and measurement in order to improve how they do their work. And I suspect their teams spend a lot of time answering similar questions. Which pieces of my data matter? In the case of measuring flow, it's your artifacts. Which artifacts matter? So what you need is a way to map these 7 different artifact types in 10 different projects across 6 different tools in a way such that you can then measure them across the board. So how do you do that? By the way, this is going back to that notion of abstraction, the quote, the abstraction is the essence of preserving information that matters in the right context and ignoring information that doesn't matter in that context. Well, in our context is the business view. So now I need to abstract away all of the artifacts that don't matter from that particular business perspective. So how do you do it? Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Product modeling essentially involves cutting swaths through all of the tools that are involved to identify the conditions under which an artifact matters, a condition under which an artifact you want to actually measure it. And so what you do is you have to do it tool by tool, and you go through and you say, okay, what are the conditions under which this artifact, an artifact from this tool should be measured? So you do it one by one. So as pretty as this picture looks, I think it's easier to understand it if you actually have a concrete example. So this is an extremely common tool chain that you see across organizations, where in this fictitious organization you're using Jama for requirements management, Jira for development, Micro Focus ALM for testing, and ServiceNow for ITSM, although I guess nobody will be using that anymore in the coming weeks. But so the conditions that you've set in order to know which artifacts matter for this particular product. In Jama, I want to take requirements from sets A, C, and F in project 159. That's the swath I want to cut. Those are the artifacts I know I need to measure. From Jira, I want epics assigned to component A from either projects D, E, or F. From ALM, I want to take risks and tests that were created after January 2017. And from ServiceNow, I want support tickets from applications H and J, only if the status is past the accepted state. So this is simply the exercise you go through. I know that's not trivial sounding, but I often say this, it's not magic, it's just work that you need to do. And if you do it, it will actually then allow you to answer questions like, how long did it take for this feature to get through the value stream? Because a feature for us started as a request in Salesforce, then went through target process, then went through Jira. In order to measure that entire time, I have to have identified my product model across all of those tools involved. And so at that point, you're able to get answers to these challenging questions from a pure product perspective. So I know that was a lot to take in, so I wanted to make sure to give you specific actions that you can take today. One, really the first thing you need to do is get your tools talking to each other. And don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with more abstraction talk, but there's 2 other abstractions that are very important. You have to be able to model your artifacts and model your statuses. If anyone's interested in that, Carmen and I are happy to chat about that afterwards. But fundamentally, get your tools talking. You will not be able to measure your value stream unless your tools are connected, full stop. You will not be able to do that. So get your tools talking. And then do an old-fashioned pen and paper model your products exercise. We've been working on this with Nationwide for a while. It's actually super fascinating. We just had a meeting about it last week or 2 weeks ago, whereby we were going through just on paper how you would cut these swaths through this extremely complex set of projects across all these different tools. I should have gotten a screenshot of that. That would have been cool. Anyway, it's really interesting to do, but it's a manual process. Go in and start doing it. Start small, of course, and give it a go and see how it goes. So I would just like to add to the slide that I already talked through that you should do all of the things that Carmen was supposed to say, and then you should also model your products. And with that, we're always looking for help. So if anyone would like to chat with us about any of these questions, how are you defining products? What is the relationship between business products and IT systems? What are good examples of agile project funding models? We get this question a lot, how you deal with that. And then how are you making the flow of work across value streams visible from a product perspective? Of course, I'm happy to talk about any other things as well. But with that, thank you.
We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left if Nicole and Carmen want to come back up. Does anybody have any questions? I can run out a mic to you, and of course we have lunch after this, so if you want to hang back and chat with them a little bit about their stories.
Or if you just want to go eat.
Yeah, but either way, they're available if you want to chat more. So anybody have a question to start things off?
You've been obliged to race through this swathe cutting business. Where can I find more information on that?
That's a super good question.
What was the question again?
He's asking if he wants more information on cutting swaths through and doing product modeling. I don't have a good instant answer for that question, but I would be happy to talk to you about it afterwards, and we can figure something out. Because it's an interesting discipline that I think will be actually coming to light more and more in the coming years, for sure.
But we'd be glad to talk about it, though, obviously, about, applying how we applied the concept, like Nicole was saying recently at Nationwide, where I was.
Have you ever heard of this notion of product modeling before?
It rings a bell.
It rings a bell, okay.
Yeah. Maybe a blog post.
There we go, yeah.
Thanks very much. It was a great talk. I really liked the way that you kind of highlighted that you need to track from idea inception. It doesn't just start in the dev team. So I guess my feedback would be that if you have the current model where the business kind of figure out what to do and then it goes to development and they assign resources and form a team and so on, you also have got a whole industry of people that are the gatekeepers on one side and then that are the gatekeepers on the other side. So, I mean, that goes beyond cognitive entrenchment. That's,
right.
That's basically how do you sell the case to these
So, I mean,
people?
I think that's a great point, right? And I can remember at one point making the discussion about DevOps, because you go to DevOps, conferences, and you would always see, there's usually a talk about DevOps and ITIL can be buddies, right? Because it was always around the right-hand side of the value stream. But I used to actually say, if you look sometimes at DevOps and you looked at ITIL or ITSM, it was really the PMBOK side of things, right? The project management book of knowledge model that was being ignored and was like the last frontier, because it's another silo that we have to think about, because just getting better from code to cloud is not going to improve our business drivers. So, I mean, what you have to do, I think, is what Nicole said that I was supposed to say on that screen is you find a business area that understands. So in the case, one of the experiments that we did was we found a business area that was very interested in the notion of going faster and working more closely with our value stream concept. And then you have to start small to change anything in culture. You can't design a way to change culture, right? Culture is kind of an organic thing, but what you can do is start small and experiment and have, and then if you have a success, then those stories become the things that change the culture. So in our case, we had 200 lines. We started experiments with 2 of those 200 teams. And those experiments and those teams then became the story. It wasn't Carmen telling the story. It was those teams telling the story. And those teams telling the story and sharing the success is critical to changing the culture and getting people to think differently about this. But that's where you need the patience part of this, because it's a journey, and you have to start small and try to, make some progress.
Follow-on question?
So I'm really picking up on the way you're describing code to cloud, and so I'm obviously here at Atlassian conference. I'm an administrator of the middle part, but doesn't that bring up the whole? You're describing a value stream, but isn't the whole notion of DevOps ignoring, as you said, the project management part? The whole concept is badly named.
Yeah. So I think if you look at, I think the first time I heard the word DevOps was 2012, and I'll let Nicole pipe in here, but DevOps has constantly been changing, right? And I think the notion I think of DevOps now is more back to almost the lean roots of how do you accelerate your capability to deliver to the business. And in order to do that, you have to start at the left-hand side. So like one of the metrics I use is Gene Kim has his DevOps Enterprise Summit conference, and just had one in London. And at that conference this year, there were 5 talks that had the word flow in it. That's the first time I can remember a DevOps conference where there was talks that had the word flow in their subject line. If you would go back to 2014, most of the discussions there were about containers and infrastructure-related items. So I think what you're seeing through the DevOps, if you will, and it's really an evolution of Agile and bringing all these things together, is the concept of flow, right? What we're trying to achieve, and what we were really trying to achieve with DevOps, is flow, right? And with flow comes a lot of other things, right? It becomes more engaged people, more collaborative people, these T-shaped concepts, empowerment, but it's really all about trying to optimize flow, and that means you start with a customer and you end with a customer. And while, a lot of these go back to the principles of Schuhart and Deming and Toyota, and they're a little different because IT has a creative aspect that maybe a design aspect we have to take into account, but you have to start to consider it. So I would say I can see the signals right now where there's going to be a lot of time spent in the next 5 years on this flow part, which is going to get more involved with this whole side of starting with the business all the way through deployment. So just like Agile became table stakes, getting good at code, the cloud's going to become table stakes, but that's not going to be the differentiator. The differentiator is going to be who can get the left-hand side of the value stream working to actually improve your capability to deliver businesses. And the FANGs, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google have kind of figured this out because they've invested millions and billions of dollars, but the rest of us can't do that, right? So we're going to have to figure this out using the concepts that Nicole, and I don't know if you want to add anything there, Nicole.
Ditto what he said.
So I think that's where I think it's going to be. And the companies that do better in, I think, the decade, the 2020s, are going to be the companies who figure out this product model. And if you don't figure it out, I think you're going to find, just like the companies that haven't made it this far because they didn't figure out Agile or cloud, they're going to be in the same boat where they're not going to be able to get through this turning point because the companies that have figured out are going to just continue to taking business away. And I'm seeing that in insurance, where I worked in insurance. The disruption around banks and startups, and I'm sure every people in this room know about it, is intense. And so I think this whole aspect of the product concept and getting quicker from the business side is going to be a differentiating factor.
All right, we are a little bit over time, but we'll leave it on differentiators and how to succeed in a digital future. And if anybody else wants to chat with Nicole and Carmen,
We're happy to chat afterwards.
yeah, feel free to come up afterwards, but everyone enjoy lunch. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
y'all.